Welcome to ADAA's educational webinar, Before the Whistle, After the Game, Talking to Your Anxious Athlete, presented by Dr. Mithcell Green and Coach Marty Kupprion. Dr. Mithcell Green is the owner of GreenPsych Clinical and Sports Psychology, a boutique private practice located in the suburbs of Philadelphia. Dr. Green is a leading licensed clinical and sports psychologist whose success over the past 20-plus years is his ability to tailor personalized solutions to his clients' problems. Dr. Green works primarily with athletes pursuing high-performance goals or coaches and athletic departments looking to educate their student athletes on mental health and performance enhancement strategies. Dr. Green speaks nationally and internationally on topics ranging from peak performance strategies to anxiety management skill development for student athletes. Dr. Green is the author of a new book titled Courage Over Confidence, Managing Mind Chatter and Winning the Mental Game. Marty Kupprion, affectionately known as Coach Coop, is excited to bring his extensive experience and passion for youth sports to GreenPsych as a youth sports development specialist and parent coach. With over 20 years of dedication to education, coaching, and sports management, Marty is committed to transforming the youth sports culture by fostering a positive and supportive environment for athletes, families, and coaches. Marty has received a mental performance mastery certification and is the co-leader of GreenPsych's Sports Parent Project. This venture will educate parents on how to support their child's athletic journey, providing them opportunities to discuss the strains of being a sports parent and how they can be their best selves when parenting their young athlete. Additionally, Marty is looking forward to equipping coaches with tools to improve their interactions with parents, players, and other adults. Athletes and families can schedule directly with Marty to work on building strong mindset and developing a plan for long-term success. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're delighted to have you present. And at this point, Dr. Green, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Jolie, and thank you for all your help getting today's webinar set up. So my name is Dr. Mithcell Green. I'm the owner of GreenPsych Clinical and Sports Psychology, which is a private practice group located in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And I'm joined by my colleague, Marty Kupprion. Marty, you want to say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Green. My background is as a former elementary school teacher and a former Division I lacrosse player. I've been coaching lacrosse for the last 20 years, from the high school level down to youth and introductory programs. And I've been in the club sports world as a club director and a leader with Next Lacrosse and now Blue Star Lacrosse out of South Jersey. And with GreenPsych, I work with athletes, coaches, and parents, and consider myself a mindset coach and a youth sports specialist.
You know, Marty came and joined GreenPsych a little bit over a year ago. And why we're so excited about this presentation is because I get to speak from the point of view of a sports psychologist who's in the office talking with kids and families. And Marty has the purview of being on the sidelines, talking with parents and kids, coaching the kids, and has sort of an insider's view to what it's really like out there in terms of athletes and parents and anxiety. And so we're going to each give you sort of our best advice and tips from our perspectives. Just so you know what we're going to cover today, and at least in a general sense, is we're going to talk about why sports can trigger anxiety, performance anxiety, even in kids who don't typically struggle with anxiety. We're going to talk about how parents can support their child's worries while also recognizing ways to manage their own concerns, the parents, that is. And we're going to give you some best practices idea for the way to build strong parent-coach relationships, become a more supportive and effective sports parent. Just by way of introduction, we pull the microscope back and look at the big picture. What Marty and I have been seeing is that when you enter youth sports, those of you parents out there know it's kind of like entering into a different universe because there's its own set of rules, its own set of language, its own pace, its own unspoken expectations. Marty will be able to speak from the point of view of a director of an enormous lacrosse club group that has multiple teams with multiple coaches, lots of emails flying around, lots of expectations. It can be difficult for kids and families to enter into the world of youth sports the way it is set up today. But we often enter into the world of youth sports because we're looking for a release. We want our kids to just be out of school, be healthy, run around with their friends, learn all the good stuff that sports can provide, like good sportsmanship, teamwork, goal setting, and just a release from the day-to-day pressure. But one of the reasons Marty and I are so busy and Green Psych is so busy these days is that regrettably for many, sports becomes a place where egos can get easily bruised and where anxiety can enter into the picture, even with some very, very young kids and families. Not long ago, I had a family come to me because their 8-year-old daughter hadn't yet found her sport. And they were concerned because this young girl's older brother had found his sport by the time he was 8, a sport that he really excelled in other words. And they were worried that their daughter was a pretty good soccer player and a pretty good lacrosse player and a pretty good swimmer. But their anxiety was that what if she doesn't find it? What will she do? How will she make her way? And boy, if that's not an example of anxiety, what is? But to be fully transparent, I remember when I was a parent of 8-year-olds, my kids are now much older, and I remember coaching them in youth basketball and watching my daughter, who was supposed to be getting ready to grab a rebound, instead twirling her hair and kind of looking at the girl across from her instead of looking up. And me, Mr. Sports Psychologist and coach, yelled, "Tasha!" from the sidelines. In other words, here was this 8-year-old who barely had played any basketball, but my anxiety was up. My nerves were up because I thought, hey, she's not doing what she's supposed to be doing out there. And so it was a really good lesson for me how even those who are supposed to know better have to pay very careful attention to how much this youth sports machine can kind of get us into overdrive mode. So you could see both your kids and you as parents need to pay very careful attention because it can be intimidating. And as Marty knows, and he could speak to, actually, maybe Marty, after I read this, you could just say something about it. As kids get older, they tend to specialize more. And, they might focus on lacrosse and decide to give up soccer or swimming or track. And when that starts to happen, that contributes to the stakes feeling really big because kids all of a sudden now have bigger expectations. They're spending more time. The parents are spending more money. All this can contribute to a very anxious scene. Am I right about that, Marty?
Yeah, really, the more athletes that I work with, the more anxious parents I see and feel like I can help. So I think the main word that I come back to is perspective, both for the parents and coaches, really all the adults around youth sports, to have the right and a healthy perspective is important, but it can be really hard.
It can be hard. And I think that's what Marty's point is well taken, which is, and sometimes you need to reach outside of your own family system and ask for some help because it can be hard to navigate. And when we see certain kids that come to us at Green Psych, some of them are coming not because they're anxious about winning or losing. They may certainly care about that, but because they've put so much of their self-worth, their identity, and their reputations into their sport. And so have their parents to some degree because of the investment that they've put into their kids and their sport, that sometimes everybody in the family is anxious and nervous about what's to come and fearful if Johnny or Mary don't succeed on the field, what that all might mean. So in short, we're sort of saying ambition, we've never seen it so high and so intense, but also Marty have and I have never seen in all the years we've been doing this so much self-doubt. Marty,
Yeah, I
anything
would
you want to add there?
I would add, athletes really want to soar, but they seem like they're stuck in pressure, comparison, fear of failure, and many other things that I can't say I totally felt as an athlete. So it feels different, it feels heavy, and in a lot of the athletes I work with, you can feel it and see it, not just the athletes, but some of the parents.
And I think that's one of the challenges for coaches. I know Marty will talk about this a little bit later, which is some coaches didn't really experience this anxiety. They didn't necessarily grow up in where there was all this going on around them in their game. Now you could have middle school games that are live streamed. Marty wasn't worried about his lacrosse games, and neither was I when I played lacrosse being live streamed. That wasn't even around then. But now, so some coaches need, and that's one of the roles that Marty plays, is educating other coaches on the fact that it's a different kind of game these days in terms of the stress and the pressure. The term that I use when kids come and talk to me for anxiety, I have a sort of a substitute word that really seems to kind of work well for the kids and families I talk to. I refer to anxiety more as this term mind chatter. It's very much similar to anxiety in the sense that it's fear-based. And my definition of mind chatter is when we're have conversations with ourselves. Let's say the young athlete is having tons of self-doubt, tons of second guessing, and they have all kinds of negative thoughts about what's going to go on in the game, the tryout, the showcase, or even just showing up for practice. Sometimes they could have lots of mind chatter. That's what we're starting to see so much in our practice. And what I teach the young kids, and I teach their parents as well, is that the reason there's chatter, it's not because they don't love to play. It's not even necessarily that they don't love their teammates or love their coach. But what happens in youth sports these days is the combination of all the uncertainty about what's going to happen. Will I play? Won't I play? Will I play well? Will I play terrible? Will I get the ball? Will I not get the ball? Will the coaches on the sidelines be impressed? Will they not be impressed? All of that uncertainty and all the high stakes that the kids feel in connection with all of that uncertainty tends to make their minds very chattery. In other words, in our work with young athletes, we actually normalize the fact that in certain games and in certain moments on the field, when they step on it, they're going to have a very busy, active mind. And while they may love the game and want to really focus on playing well, their very, very active mind is actually focused on the complete opposite of what they're wanting it to focus on. That very busy, active mind is focused on what could go wrong, what the consequences of a bad game could mean, what would happen if the coach isn't impressed with them. So they're busy trying to focus on what's going to go well. Their mind chatter is focused on what's going to go wrong. I have found, and I wrote an entire book about this, that talking to kids about this in this sort of way, staying away from these very psychological terms that can feel very labeling, and just saying, wow, it sounds like your chatter is really on duty when you show up to the field, and getting them to see that big time competition, when the stakes feel really big, involves a lot of chatter, begins to what I call sort of normalize it for these kids. They begin to really understand, if you look at this chart here, or this image here, that when they show up to a game, you could see the beginning of the game, they want to focus on getting out strong in the first quarter. Maybe they want to focus on, if it's basketball, getting a couple of shots up or driving to the basket. But their mind chatter, notice that big green line, their chatter is what we call it time travels. It takes them out of the moment and gets them to focus on everything that could go wrong. If it does go wrong and is possibly could go wrong, it's your mind chatter is going to focus on it. Now, for those of you who are in the world of anxiety, you understand this isn't just a sports thing. If you have a young person who has social anxiety, that same chattery mind is time traveling. They're not thinking about, oh, what if I go up to that person and introduce myself and they say, oh my God, I'm so glad you introduced myself. It's so nice to meet you. I can't wait for us to hang out, right? A socially anxious mind is thinking about, what if they turn around and walk away from me? What if they kind of like start laughing in my face? What if I feel terribly embarrassed? So those of you who understand anxiety and anxiety management, this is very similar in many ways in the world of sports, where the anxiety, in this case, the chatter, takes you out of the moment and gets you worried about what could go wrong. The reason this is so important, and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit, is because this is why it's so hard for your young athlete to feel confident sometimes. This is why it's hard for your young athlete, despite the hours of training and watching video and getting in the weight room and doing the optional and extra practices, they're still struggling. It's because their chattery, nervous mind goes on duty. And as I said earlier, and Marty knows this, a lot of the kids that we might talk to aren't very nervous and chattery in school, even though school has a lot of at stake. These are often kids who want to get their GPA up. They're trying to get into good schools. They sometimes want to get into good schools and play in college. But part of it is because in sports, the uncertainty is you just never know what's going to happen. You could be the most well-prepared player out on the court, but you don't know how your opposition's going to play. You don't know if the refs are going to make bad calls. You don't know if the weather is going to be a factor. In sports, unlike school, there tends to be a whole lot more uncertainty. And that's partly why in sports, there tends to be a whole lot more anxiety for some kids than there is in other parts of their life. So just to sum this up, one of the things that we teach these kids is we tell them that you're not the problem. You don't have a problem. The only problem you have, if you want to call it a problem, is that you have a very busy, active, chattery mind. And we help distinguish who they are. They're the ones who want to play well. They're the ones who want to see their hard work pay off. They're the ones who want to, let's say, for example, be aggressive in the lacrosse game, versus their chatter, which has a totally different agenda than them. Their chatter wants them to fear what's going to happen next, worry about everything that could go wrong, doesn't want to trust themselves and all the hard work they've put in. So this is just a snapshot into how we work with athletes with a lot of anxiety or performance anxiety. We teach them it's not you, it's your chatter. And your chatter is going to show up to your games and your showcases and your tryouts. And we're going to begin to help you distinguish who you are from your chatter so you can learn to what we call make room for your chatter. Instead of fighting with it, we have you kind of try to accept the fact and acknowledge the fact that it's going to be there, but we have to figure out like how to find a proper place for it to sort of wait for you to compete. We sort of try to sometimes we give chatter a name, you know, like Mr. Annoying or, Mr. Fearful. Younger kids in particular might enjoy giving it a name so they realize it's not them, it's just that voice that's looking for trouble. That's why I've created this mantra that's now trademarked, where we tell our athletes, you don't need to be confident necessarily when you're anxious, because when you're anxious and chatter is getting after you, it's really more about courage. And this is really an intriguing concept for a lot of young athletes. We're saying to you, you know what? You're going to be fearful. And instead of thinking there's something wrong with you for being anxious and fearful, let's see this as an opportunity for you to be courageous, to be bold. And we have these conversations. Is there someone in your life? It could be Uncle Joe or Aunt Mary who's really bold because they're fighting through something that they didn't know that they were going to be able to get through. We want them to channel this inner courage that they already have and start to talk to them about the fact that they actually don't even need to be confident necessarily, which is a big pop psychology thing that they're often hearing, which is it's all about being confident. For some of our chattery kids, it's not all about being confident. It could be about finding opportunities to be courageous. So before I turn it over to Marty, let me go over some of my top tips for those of you who are parents out there and either chattery yourself or you're the parent of a chattery youngster. So first of all, it's important for you to know if your youngster is having a lot of doubts and negative thoughts, as much as we wish they wouldn't and we wish they didn't, it's probably pretty normal. In many cases, it's pretty normal that they're not so sure of themselves, even though they've been putting in the work. We want to reinforce for these kids, and you do too, parents, that they're not wimps or cowards because they're showing up nervous. If you just take our social media here at Green Psych, we are constantly putting out there for everyone to see that even the best athletes in the world, the best runners in the world, the best lacrosse players in the world, the best basketball players in the world have to learn ways to manage their lack of focus and their nerves. Whether you're LeBron James or Rafael Nadal, those are examples of athletes who say there's lots of times their confidence kind of is up and down. So we sometimes like to say, hey, sometimes it's overrated. So as parents, instead of trying to think with them about how they could just be confident, and in fact, instead of telling them they should be confident, we want you to change the conversation you're having with them slightly and try to connect with them around their fear. As you could see, we want you to maybe begin to talk to them about the fact that instead of saying, oh, wow, you should be confident, maybe you could say to them, wow, I could see your mind chatter is really on duty right now. Or I understand you and I, Johnny, we got to figure out what to do with that big chattery mind of yours. Mr. Chatter seems like he showed up right as you were eating breakfast this morning because he knew you were playing at 2 o'clock this afternoon. What's he starting to say to you? What is all that messages that he's going to pump out to you? What did you learn from Dr. Green and from Coach Coop? Is that chatter really who you are, or is that chatter just that nervous part of you that's worried about every possible thing that could go wrong? Let's kind of name it for what it is, because if you could name it, you could begin to tame it. So let's connect with our kids around the fact that it's normal to be nervous and a little bit scared. Part of what you could also do as parents is try to stay away from conversations that are all about results and outcome. If you have a chattery youngster, when you tell them there's no reason you should lose this match, the first thing their chattery mind does is go, what if you blow it? When you say there's no reason that you can't score 15 points out there today in the basketball game, their chattery mind immediately goes, what if I don't even come close? So you start to inadvertently, as parents, feed into the nervous, chattery mindset by talking too much about outcomes. You want to talk to them, and I know Marty's going to talk to you about this, about effort and intention and desire, rather than what they feel like they have to do or should do. Their chattery mind will turn your encouraging words about outcome into mandates and obligations and more stress. The last two pieces are just about the car ride home. If we ask our athletes about what's the most stressful part about sports, many an athlete's telling us the car ride home sucks. Because in some cases, not all cases, parents are chattery and nervous themselves about the fact that Johnny or Jane, had a ground ball go through their legs in the second part of the game, and they're starting to ask them questions about the game that they're not ready to talk about. In many cases, we like a 24-hour rule. Let's not talk about the game. I understand the instinct to want to talk about the game the second you get in the car. It's fresh in your mind and it's fresh in their minds. But especially when things haven't gone well, I mean, think about it yourself, parents. If you have a tough day at work and the first thing when you walk through the door is your partner says, how come you didn't make that deal? How come the deal didn't go through? You need some space. You need some time, let alone being caught in a car, which is just a little capsule where you can't leave and you can't escape. If your child wants to bring it up to you, it's their sport. If they want to talk about it, that's a different story. But we encourage parents to decompress themselves in the car and in addition, give their kids a chance to decompress. And this is the other part of what Marty and I want to talk to you about today, which is the kids aren't alone in their chatter. I know from being a parent, Marty's a parent, which is we have to learn to manage our own chatter, because if we don't keep an eye on our own nervous, fearful, consequential way of thinking, what we do is we sign our kid up for every possible optional workout that's on planet Earth because we're fearful that if they don't sign up because somebody else signed up, they're never going to make it. We start to overcare about everything that they're doing. We start to analyze every result. That they have a bad game on some random Saturday, we start to, in our chattery minds, think they're never going to make it in sports because they had a crappy day, because they had a sleepover at their friend's house. You know what? We got to overrule sleepovers anymore because you know what? It's getting in the way of their sports performance. Even though we as parents often know in our right minds, of course, they need that social downtime with their friends. We start to overtrain, overtalk our kids, overcare, and overcontrol. So one of the things, if you work with Marty or me or us at Green Psych, is we want to talk to you about isn't just how to help your own kids with their chatter, but how you can help manage your own chatter, because the kids will pick up on your chatter. The kids will pick up on your nerves and they will play the game with one eye on the field and with one eye with you on the sidelines, whether you're clapping for them or whether you're looking in complete disgust. These are some of the things, parents, that you could do. I'm going to turn it over to Marty because he has a really interesting insight from being on the field with these kids and with these parents for so many years. Let me take it away to you, Marty, and add for people what you see is most important in terms of helping your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just echo the mind chatter. Dr. Green, I think for me as a coach, that was transformative and has really helped me to just learn more about mind chatter, what that is, how to label it, and how to, put it somewhere else, as you say. So I would just
Right.
echo that for coaches as well as parents and obviously athletes. But for the parents, I would say, we've talked about perspective and I think what you value. So internal versus external scoreboard. I'll just give the example of a team I coached this past weekend at a tournament. They went 1-4, and as we closed with the team, we talked about the internal scoreboard. And the internal scoreboard is unique to that individual athlete and how they feel about their involvement in the weekend. And it might not be represented by a goal or by a win. And to tie the value of that weekend to just the scoreboard would be hollow and I think short-sighted. So for me as a coach, I'm constantly reminding my athletes, my parents, and even the other coaches that I work with to check in on their internal scoreboard, right? How do you self-reflect and how are you handling the little things that might add up to a goal or a win or a championship and really reverse engineering what's most important there. So I think what I would echo to parents is not to just place value on that result, but the process. Um, and I think Coach Leahy, who's a good friend and one of the most winningest high school lacrosse head coaches, would say, how did you serve your brothers or how did you serve your sisters? So that could be a way that, you grade yourself on the weekend rather than wins and losses. What kind of teammate was I? And or was my son or daughter? And then the next one, support, don't solve. It is not the parent's job to come in and clear obstacles in the sports experience for their athlete. I think that is the most awkward, um, direction of energy that I see from parents that is really tough for all stakeholders, not just the coaches and the athletes, but really those parents kind of adding to their own anxieties by interfering where it's not appropriate or at times where it's not appropriate. So I think Dr. Green hit on some of that with the car ride home and the discussions and how to kind of take the back seat in some of those discussions to your athlete when they're ready, but really just trying to resist the urge and opening, asking them questions, helping them to open up, because like we kind of pointed to earlier, these teams and these experiences that the kids are having, they're not the same that we had. And it's very different, and we need to ask questions and learn rather than assume and, play the fixer. And to that point, be more. It doesn't mean you have to do more. Just kind of being consistent and being a calm presence. It's really what your kids need and would love to be able to expect from you. The
Marty, could I just jump in there?
Go ahead.
Because I love that be more when I think about it as a sports parent, when my kids were in their heyday of constant competitions, um, I would think about how I would show up for like a friend's kid I might be talking to about their competition over the weekend. Like I would just sort of be there and like be able to hear them and just sort of support them, whether it went well or didn't go well. It's harder to do that with your own kids. Just be there and but that's one of it's such a it's sort of like, it seems so simple but I found it personally helpful when my own kids, because we can get so wrapped up in their performances. I imagine how I would show up for someone else's kids in that moment, or how I show up in my office for kids. And I would say, my kids deserve that from me too. And I really took that seriously. So even though most parents aren't sports psychologists, but you could imagine how you are for your friends' kids and try to encourage you to be more for your own.
Yeah, that's great. I often use the phrase, how do you want to be remembered? So, when your children grow up, you want them to be, successful adults, and you probably won't be valuing that middle school soccer tournament or showcase as much in the long term. So, yeah, just kind of having that consistent presence that helps your kid, be play it cool. Um, Going from there, and something we continue to hit on is trust the long game. There's nothing to be earned in youth sports that you really want to sacrifice your relationship with your kid. And I say it from a coach's perspective of I don't want to be anyone's last coach in lacrosse. I don't want to be the reason that they stop. So I want to be someone that supports and believes and creates opportunities, gives real feedback. But the best players that I've coached over 20 years, they weren't the best players in fifth grade or in eighth grade. They were the best people and they were the hardest workers and they love the sport. So I think really trying to look for these early checkpoints in youth sports and early points of validation is a cause for burnout and pressure and, really unhealthy things in the family dynamic, not just for an athlete. Chasing fit and not flash. I see this a lot in the lacrosse world and especially in the club scene and the showcase and recruiting environment of the next big thing or the next shiny thing. And I think relationships are really the most important. Finding coaches that you trust, finding programs that you trust, and that really care about you for the long term and can give you feedback and guidance that's unique to you. And I think the programs that kind of just pop up or the events that just pop up here and there, they might have great marketing, a great hype, great things listed, but I would really trust proven programs and where you've built relationships rather than just kind of leave those high and dry. And I think that tone of really the NIL and the transfer portal in college, some of that loyalty and continuity can be lost in the sports world or can be discarded. Um,
Can
Really,
I jump
family
in there?
values. Go ahead, Doc.
Oh, I'm sorry, Marty. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I
Go
was
ahead.
just thinking about the chase fit, not flash. Also, for you parents who have kids who are pretty chattery and or anxious, the fit I think Marty is also referring to is there's some kids who have great talent, but they are struggling with mind chatter or anxiety, and sometimes in a very clinical way. And the best fit might not be the quote unquote best team. It might not be the team with the best players because that environment, at least maybe at that point in your kid's life, is just too much for them. They're not going to enjoy it. They go to practices completely stressed out. We have kids who sometimes are throwing up before practices. Now, yes, it looks great that they're on that particular A team, but they live in constant dread of the experience. And they could maybe go to this club or this team over here and have a good old time with it. And even if that team isn't as successful, but they're enjoying it and they're playing more and they're not going to bed in constant state of fear. That can be very hard for families to make that decision. It can be hard for kids to come to terms with that decision. Um, and relevant to college, that's sometimes the way I know Marty and I are counseling kids who want to play in college. Some of them want to go to the glitzy program and the high profile program, but there are some kids who will be eaten alive in that program because the intensity will create so much anxiety for them. We're trying to get them to see if you really want to play and you really want to enjoy the experience, maybe you could go to a school over here, which is a great school. Maybe it doesn't have as big, as shiny a name as this school, but it's a better fit for who you are, and where your chatter is at this stage of your life.
Yeah, and then I think really just revisiting family values. I see a lot of families that will prioritize sports and youth sports in a way that is really unhealthy for the long-term development of their kid, and that worries me. But really, I would encourage families to check in. What's most important to us? What's most important to us this year? What are some goals we have for our student athlete? What are some goals we have as a family? And then if we're talking about sports, what do we value within sports? Um, the commitment, the relationships. Is it wins? Is it playing time? Is it, the coach loving you? Is it embracing challenge? I think that's unique to every family. And when I ask my families at my club, what do you want to get out of this year? Or why are you here at this club? I hear different things. So I don't know that there's right answer there. I would suggest as a good resource, Project Play and the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee have come up with a parenting toolkit. And part of that is a worksheet and a session for parents to talk about what kind of role models they want to be for their kids, what they'll do to create a safe environment, and how the family will discuss, their most important values. So I think defining that, revisiting, and then living it, is super important. And then the essential fact there is that the values that you have reduce anxiety and can guide your decisions when the pressure builds. So when I work with families that have strong values and have had those discussions and are well intentioned, they have a different perspective than those that haven't and are flying by, what's new, what's hot, what did the other talented player's dad say to him they're going to do next, and trying to keep up.
Yeah, and this conversation that Marty and his group at his club at Blue Star are having with their families is still kind of unique in the sports landscape across the country. In other words, a lot of it is you just pay your registration money for the team, or go to your you play on your school's team. And again, there's plenty of environments where everything is wonderful and lovely and low key, and the kids are having a great time. So don't get me wrong, but this conversation about values is just of utmost importance because of everything we've said about how youth sports can get very sticky and complicated. And of course, for many families, you have more than one child. You might have a child who's way into sports, but you've got two others that into theater and into art. And how are you going to make that work for your family? Because the way the youth sports landscape is, they might have games over Thanksgiving weekend. They may have games over Christmas holidays or New Year's holidays. And you've got these other kids who have to be dragged to various tournaments. You have to make a lot of difficult decisions. And I think one of the things that Marty and I treasure in our work with families is we're the kind of people you could kind of talk that through with, because we appreciate it's not sometimes so easy to know what's the right thing to do or what's going to be best for our families. And you don't want to have to give up something for your athlete child, but on the other hand, you may have more than one child. So this is a great direction, I think, for families to take heed of, which is to all, over a course of the dinner, everybody write down on a piece of paper, what they think their values are, and then compare and contrast and see if you can come up with a sort of a family, list of that could be put on the fridge. Kind of, this is kind of what's most important to us. It's a great way to be role models for your kids in terms of helping them clarify how they're going to make some tough decisions. We appreciate you being here. This is just an example of something that I offer for our families and kids who are feeling pretty chattery. It's an online course that they can take. Both Marty and I are both available to talk with you as families or work with individual kids. There's some Instagram information there. There's our email there. Of course, there's our website where you can get all kinds of information about the work that we do. Sorry for the abrupt shift from Marty's conversation to this at the end of our presentation, but we don't want to go on too long. We feel like we've provided you with a rich opportunity to appreciate that the sports landscape can be very tough to navigate. Some kids who are already anxious might feel even more anxious in this environment. Some kids who've never really experienced much anxiety, or parents, will feel more anxious in this environment because there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of moving parts. And we want you to know there are resources out there for you. And if you want any help in this regard or learning about more resources, you're certainly welcome to contact us. So thank you for that. And I think, Jolie, does this bring about any questions on your end?
So, Dr. Green, as a parent, um, when should I worry that my child's anxiety is too much and consider getting them professional help?
That's a great question. The first thing I think about when I hear about these kids who just hate to go to practice, it's not just because I had such a great positive sports experience, but I appreciate that you sign up for a team and the value of just being around your peers. You don't have to do homework. You're supposed to, just kind of be able to run around. When I hear kids are upset and so nervous to go to practice, that to me is a real red flag where maybe you want to be asking for the chance to maybe talk to the coach about or letting a coach know what's going on. Um, just along those lines, Jolie, one of the things that I sometimes recommend for families where there is that level of anxiety for a kid is sometimes good coaches like Coach Coop and the group that he works with, if you go and say, hey, my kid's really nervous and anxious, one of the great suggestions I like is, could he show up early? Would you be able to meet him just like 10 minutes before practice? Maybe he or she could help put the cones out for everybody. Maybe you could sort of go through with him what the plan is for the day. Maybe he could even kind of help kind of organize, one of the drills that we're going to do. Um, Give your son or daughter, your child, a role in the practice, and it could begin to bond them to the coach. It could make them feel a little bit more of a sense of control. Maybe he or she and the coach could have a secret signal to check in with each other. Maybe they're just ways, or sometimes the coach will be willing to give them a whistle, give them a little bit of authority. But to answer your original question, so not wanting to go to practice, getting physically sick sometimes before a practice can be part of it. Not wanting to go out of bed, get out of bed, really low mood before and even after practice. We have some kids who can be anxious before practice, but they come back and they go, oh, that was great. They loosened up and they weren't. But if they come back just as sort of down and worried as they were before they left, um, that's what maybe stands out to me as some of the biggest hallmarks. I could go on, but that's what I want parents to look out for.
Well, I think that's extremely helpful. Thank you. Well, and I have a follow-up question for Marty. Um, what is different about coaching now than it was 20 years ago?
Wow, that's a great question. I could probably write a book on it. So I think the first thing that hits me is we no longer can say that we know exactly what these kids are going through. And I think the childhood experience, the youth sports experience are vastly different with technology and social media and a lot of these pressures and the professionalization of youth sports. And then I think as a coach, really just the access that parents and families have has changed. So my dad was a coach and an athletic director in the 1980s, and there was no email, there was no cell phone, there was barely an answering machine, and everything was dealt with in person. And those interactions were in person, and the on-field stuff was left on the field. Um, Not highlight videos or emails or texts about playing time. So I think some of that as coaches, you're putting yourself in a spot where people can, um, access or be critical in ways that are different than in the past. But really, I think about the kids and generations of adults kind of assuming we know exactly what they're going through because it's the same as our experience. And
Mhm.
that's just not true anymore. And I think we're all kind of feeling the anxieties around that. But that came from Hope for Haley and Kevin and Christine Jackson, who we work with at Green Psych. And that's one of their messages is we need to connect. We need to have conversations. We need to learn from these kids in order to best support them. And it's really not about assuming we know what's right, but really opening up the door to healthier conversations.
I think that's extremely helpful. It's a different world than most of us in our age range. Well, again, thank you so much. Very insightful information for parents of children in youth sports. The talk about struggling and anxiety, extremely helpful. And I just thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
opportunity, and we appreciate anyone who listens to this and hopefully can take this to their hometown, to their field, local field, and practice some of what we've been talking about today.